I'll get started. Welcome to the February 11th, 2025 City Council Work Session meeting. Our meetings are public and you are welcome to join us in person or by watching from the Council's agenda page, Zoom, YouTube, or SLC TV. We hope you'll continue to join us in whichever manner you feel most comfortable. This is a work session meeting during which there's no public comment. Please join us on February 18th during the 7 p.m. formal meeting to share your comments. And of course, we always welcome your feedback at P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah, 84114. Email at council.comments@slc.gov or 24-hour phone comment line at 801-535-7654. Comments we receive on any agenda-related topics are shared with council members and posted to our website, slccouncil.com. We are going to be moving the items around a bit. So the first item on our schedule is going to be item A6, the state legislative briefing follow-up, followed by the winter shelter plan update, and we are tabling item 2, the R1 single-family residential districts proposed zoning text amendment, until next week when we can have the full council present for that. Do we have the legislative team available? Okay, Andrew, I can do the legislative update. I see your props. Can you do the legislative? Yeah, thanks. Let's move to what was scheduled as item 1, winter shelter plan update, if you're okay with that, Andrew.
I have one slide.
Okay, great.
Thanks, council members. Don't be distracted by the water in front of you first. I got a slide.
I'm very excited for this water thing.
All right. I've done some of my best work with water in plastic cups in my life. So this slide tells you the current update on the shelter capacity as well as cleaning efforts going on. Still at capacity, including winter overflow for the year, and it includes Code Blue is also active as of tonight again. Encampment impact mitigation work and rapid intervention work has been pretty slow actually the last 2 weeks. There's been a lot of Code Blue nights and a lot of weather-related delays. So that includes this week. There was intent to go to Victory Road this week for the first time in a while. That is put on hold again due to Code Blue. And then continuing work around the Jordan River, really 21st South and North, clear to Backman, and then also some work around 13th South this week, hopefully. A resource fair on Friday at the Geraldine E. King Resource Center with clients of that center. And then again, numerous Code Blue events the last few weeks. The Second and Second Coalition, who has been staffing that with volunteers, really needs more volunteers. So again, we have the link here. Hopefully we can get that to you all to send out on your avenues as well as ours. The more volunteers they have, the more beds they can open up. A huge deal for us right now. So I encourage everyone to take part in that.
So they have capacity for more beds if they had volunteers.
They could go to probably twice as many beds in one place. They have 2 locations they could do if they have enough volunteers. Yes.
Thanks for that clarification. That's important. Then I'd love to share that on mine. I'm sure other council members would as well.
Appreciate it. Thank you. All right, Mr. Chair, that's the last slide. I do have a presentation that relates. Oh, sorry.
Can I add the area by Cottonwood Dog Park between 500 North and North Temple is particularly causing anxiety to my neighbors. Could we ask the list to get some attention?
Yeah, I didn't call it in there specifically, but definitely Backman going south to the Jordan to North Temple essentially. But you're right, that area's been pretty heavily used.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right, Mr. Chair, I'm going to pull one of these microphones on the other side and talk in front of you all for a second.
Great. Do you need one of our phones or something?
Whatever works for you, Mr. Chair. You want me to turn my back to you all and present? I'll talk through it a little bit. How about that?
Let's let Andrew do it as he was planning.
All right. Sorry for those online. This is set up for the council members to see particularly.
Yeah.
Oh, there you
got
go.
The camera fixed.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Mayor. She wants to make sure that we're taken care of. I'm not electrocuting myself. Well, what you'll see in front of you are cups of water. They represent different areas in the system right now. I want to bring this up this way as a visual representation, and very crude and limited, obviously, but an idea of how we got to where we are today and how the public safety plan that the city's put together helps to address this, and why it was formulated the way it was. Okay, so what you'll see here from your left to right, county jail capacity, you'll see emergency shelters, residential treatment options. That's usually where somebody goes and lives in the treatment program for a period of time and then transitions out. Supportive housing, which incorporates a lot of different types of housing. And I put it next to here because when you leave residential treatment, generally speaking, you're going to want to step down into an outpatient program, and that requires you to have a place to live. So a lot of times, a lot of the housing we're talking about is service enriched in that way. There's a lot of help along those folks. And then just deeply affordable housing. In general, we tend to talk about that about 30% median income. For one person, that's about $13,000 a year or less. Family of four is, I think, a little under $30,000, if I remember correctly. Okay, very broad. This does not encapsulate everything. What we found, though, is that the current county jail we've got in Salt Lake County was built in 1999, really hasn't been enlarged that much in that period of time. We're going on 20 plus years of that time. They've been running at capacity, and their capacity is about 2,000 at a time. They've been running at a capacity for as long as most people can remember. So they're running at that. If you can't see it, it's right at the lip of the cup. So what that means is that when, generally speaking, when somebody comes in, is arrested, and they're booked into jail, they are generally having to look at crowding capacity issues. Sometimes people are released for a variety of ways, but one of them is because they don't have the capacity to keep them there. And they go from matrix about lowest offenders to sort of highest offenders. But this is sort of what happens, right? Now, ideally, what they want to do is the jail wants to discharge somebody to like a treatment provider or a housing option. And so they'll try and like pour it into another cup, right? That gives them more capacity. It's very helpful that way. What happens, though, is that, say, the shelters right now, we've been running at capacity in Salt Lake County for going on 2 years now. And it's actually over capacity. It's running over. And that's pretty typical, right? I give you the update numbers every council meeting, not to bore you, but to tell you this is still real. This is what's happening. Now, ideally, a shelter, when they're full, doesn't have any place else to go. They'd like to folks go into housing down here, right? Say supportive housing. What we found, or treatment, is that treatment providers are also full. In fact, the waiting list in Salt Lake County for residential treatment is quite large because they're holding people for 2 and 3 times what they'd like to. Now, the difference with residential treatment is they don't have a place to sort of pour people out into. They'd like them to move into, say, housing down here. But if these are full, they're not going to pour people out, pour them out. Now, supportive housing has also been full. We know that. We don't have enough of that. Salt Lake County estimated we needed 1,000 supportive housing units now, today in this county, 1,000 to meet the current demand. We're full. Affordable housing, we also know that for every 100 households in this county who need this level of housing affordability, 1 unit available. 1 for every 100 people. Gardner Institute. So that's full. Look at that. Okay. Now, so what happens when the county jail is full? They can't find a place to go, right? So this is what happens. It overflows. And where do you think it overflows to?
Jordan River Trail.
Yeah, or other places, right? Okay. That's right. Now, if a shelter is full, where do they flow to?
The Jordan River Trail.
You're getting the idea here, right? Now,
it's actually Topher Park, but thanks.
Pick your council district in your area, and you're probably going to think of some place right now in your neighborhoods where you're going to find folks, right? Now, if you look at residential treatment, they don't generally release. So the mental health providers will say, well, look, I can't just dump people out on the street. I have to hold on to them. That's why this gets filled up, because they can't transition to something else. So they're a little different in the sense they don't sort of move their cup someplace else unless they have an availability down here on the housing side. All right. So our public safety plan looked at all these numbers and said, oh, if we just do one thing at a time, we're not going to get anywhere, are we? Now, I know there's a lot of attention paid right now a lot of attention paid to police departments and our work on the street, right, with enforcement. And enforcement is important for a variety of reasons. But what we're doing sometimes, we're saying, all right, we got all these folks on the street down here. So what we're asking is my police department, great people, working very hard. All right, I want you to go enforce on the street and pick them up and put them back into here. That's our enforcement. Now, if I keep doing that, they just keep coming out again, all right? Same with the shelters. So a police officer will go out and like, I want to get you in a shelter. And so I try, and I know I can't offer that because there's not shelter availability. So it's hard sometimes if you're a first responder or an outreach worker to say, oh, please trust me, I'll try to get into help, but I can't really offer you anything because this is what happens. I'll take you to say an intake and there's no room, right? So our public enforcement efforts are important, but if that's all we're doing is adding more officers to the street, this is what we're going to end up doing over and over again. That's hard. It's hard on everybody. Nobody wants to be in that position, right? So part of the plan was enforcement, obviously, of our frontline needs on the street. But a second piece was talking about county jail capacity. So if we add, say the jail found a way to double capacity. I don't know how that happens, but suppose they did. And we pour it in. I'll borrow this one too. What happens now is, all right, I got capacity for a period of time, but if I'm not working on the rest of this, pretty soon I'm going to fill up again. Same thing again, just different location. All right? We need more treatment, obviously, but treatment's waiting for housing to come online, so we need more of this. County plan's important for this. So part of our safety and security plan was we got to address more housing long term. One of the things that we forget about sometimes is the fact that, say I add more treatment beds with the jail beds. I have, say, double the capacity amazingly. I don't know how we do that, but we did that. That will do this. And I'll keep dumping in, and the jail will keep dumping in, right? And they're going to fill up, and the jail will be good. And the jail will fill up. You get the sense, right? And now I have more capacity, but I've filled it up over time. So what we have to do is all these areas have to be addressed in one way, but particularly down here, because what we could do is after all of this, I could spend another, $500 million, the county estimated for their bond on a jail and some other things associated with that. And I could, on the jail, and I could spend that much on treatment beds. But if I don't spend it down here on the housing, there's still no exit strategy here. So we spent all that there, plus I've still got to spend it down here on a variety of housing options. So we don't say that housing fixes everything. Even with treatment, it doesn't fix everything. But ultimately, after you invest in all these areas, you still have to invest down here. If you have $1 billion to invest in one place in this system, one place might be on the housing front, specifically the supportive housing and deeply affordable housing, because all of these cups can dump into that. And you're going to have to build this anyway. Even if you build all of that out, you're going to have to build this. These are big policy discussions and questions for you and for others. But this is helpful for me sometimes to think about there's a capacity problem across the system. And when we say in our safety and security plan that we need police on the front lines in different areas, we need jail capacity, we need treatment, we need housing, it's because this is critical to us. Here's a dilemma. I want to leave you off with a dilemma here. The dilemma is that as one city, we represent about 17% of the population of this county, Salt Lake City does. We represent about 6% of the population of the entire state. We also have a majority of the shelter beds in our county, over 800 this winter of the 2,000 in the county. We estimate right now that we have about 58% of the permanent supportive housing in the entire state, 10 times our proportional population. We also know that the county jail is close to us, obviously, South Salt Lake. But we also know the state prison has got 6 community correction centers in the state, 6 of them. 2 of them are in Salt Lake City directly. 4 of the 6 are within 5 miles of my house on 900 West in Salt Lake City, 4 of the 6. The other two are in Utah County, up in Weber County. When you don't have a place to go after prison, that's where you go. You can get a sense here, right? We can go on in other statistics, but the more we build independent of everybody else as a city, the more that we're doing it alone, the worse this gets, because it looks like from the outside, all this stuff on the street is us. The reality is, say on a treatment side, right now there's not really great data statewide about where all the treatment beds are. Our best guess right now is we have about 680 residential treatment beds for substance use treatment in this county. Utah County, we've got about 1.2 million people. Utah County's got about 720,000 people. They have about 34. 680, 34. Davis and Weber County, to my knowledge, have 0. If you need that treatment, you know where you're gonna have to go to Salt Lake County. You get the sense now. The more that we double down and triple down and try and do it ourselves, the worse it gets and the harder it is for us to sort of maintain. That's why we've worked so hard to say, I know it's frustrating when you go out your street and your neighborhood and you have your neighbors talk to you about thing, but the reality is if we just do it alone and throw stuff at it, this could get even worse before the Olympics come. We have to have those collaborations. We have to have, in our safety and security plan, we ask very specifically, we have to have other counties and cities all step into the space and help. We have to have that. Otherwise, everything runs downhill right into Salt Lake City, and we can't do it alone. Difficult policy discussions, I get it. But hopefully this frames it a little bit about why our safety and security plan looks the way it does, why we've been advocating so hard for that, and why sometimes it feels stressful when we can't just sort of do stuff ourselves and just do it, right? Maybe questions, maybe not.
I have a question, Andrew. I know you mentioned residential treatment centers keep people, but my understanding is they also are sometimes funded by Medicaid, and there's like a specific number of days that can be funded for those. So people do graduate out of these programs, right? Like Odyssey House or whatever. Where do they typically, do we see them just falling back into the same cycle again and again, or what is the placement rate out of residential treatment to supportive housing or deeply affordable?
It's hard to say specifically. Most of those programs, I'll say First Step House is a pretty good example of a program that is a treatment program, but they identified that they could do that inpatient treatment and then there's no place to go. So over time, they've actually moved into the housing space. Other treatment providers are doing the same thing. They build their own housing to help step down, and then there's a lot of effort to try and do more of that. But what you're looking at is probably having to prioritize folks with the highest need sometimes in those programs into housing, and it means there's movement, but it's slow. And instead of staying 120 days and I'm ready to go down to a lower level of treatment, I may not be there because of medication needs, ongoing support, housing, those kind of things. So it's hard to say. All those treatment providers are working really hard to find locations, and they generally do eventually. But it's not easy, and it takes a lot of resource and effort on their side.
Peter.
Building the infrastructure. Sometimes it's not just the physical space, although clearly the physical space on deeply affordable and supportive is absolutely missing. Is my instinct correct that we also need to build the human infrastructure? Like, people are going to school to get degrees in social work so that they can make $45,000 a year doing the most stressful work you will do for benefit. And I'm speaking from personal experience. This continues to be a pervasive issue as well. Is that impacting capacity as well?
Oh, definitely. I think if you talk to the providers, they'll say, we do need money, but we need money to pay people. And the state's identified this as well, and they said we need to figure out pathways towards licensure, and that I'll say as a social worker who came up through the system, I made more in the state of Maine with a bachelor's degree than I did with a master's here.
Yeah.
Now that was before the housing sort of exploded in expense here, but that's a real dilemma of somebody coming through school and weighing their options and saying, maybe I have a proclivity and a desire to be mission driven and work on that, but when I look at the financial side of this, it may not factor out, and I have to figure out how do I maybe take a job that pays enough and then maybe volunteer. And that's pretty typical in the nonprofit sector, right? So yes, there's definitely a need for pay needs, for benefits needs in these small nonprofits. That's a hard thing. to attract people, to retain people past their first couple years out of college. It's all incorporated there. So, say the county has some more jail, but staff to do it. First Step House has said very clearly if they had more staff, they could open up more beds they have available right now. I mean, that's true across the board.
Yep. Council member.
Thank you, Andrew, and I really appreciate the show and tell. It hits a point really well, and it does a great job of explaining the issues that we have across the board. And so I appreciate the clear example and the description here. My question is on the correctional facilities. There's 6, you said, 4 within 5 miles of your house. How many beds are there, and do they also have the same flow problem? Do they stay there longer, or do they have like a minimum, a maximum amount of time they can stay in those beds? And what is their recidivism rate, and where do they end up going also? How do people move into there and out?
Now, these are State Department of Corrections facilities. So they have a website that could go through the locations of these. It's not a secret. But we could also get the details to you about their data rates and ask them as well. What they're doing is they need people to supervise. So probation and parole officers is a piece of this. All these folks are generally encouraged or required to go get jobs and then stay there at night and check in. And then there's a process sort of move out of there. But again, it's the same issue if, say, you're in one of those facilities, where are you supposed to pour into? If I get a job or maybe 2 jobs, do I make enough to even afford an apartment? And to fulfill my probation or parole requirements, right? And then you're limited about where you can go sometimes, family and friends, not with other felons, those kind of things. So there's a lot of issues in there. It's supposed to be a very good program to help people step out of corrections, and the county wanted to mirror their Just Accountability Center and a similar idea about step out of jail into that, and then back into, say, the housing market. But we need more of those, and then we also need them, in my view. I think the closer you are to where you live or where you came from, the better off. And ideally, if I live in some other part of the state, I should be able to get resources there and be able to stay part of my community instead of having to relocate to another part of the state.
So all those correctional facilities get filled up from across the different jails and prisons in Utah, basically where the next bed is located. So you could actually...
Those are we have 2 state prisons, one in Gunnison, one in Salt Lake City. These are all state level folks who have fulfilled the requirements of their incarceration and then are in probation or parole. I think generally parole coming out.
Okay, thank you.
Can you help me? Oh, sorry, Lopez Chavez.
Thanks. I had 2 quick questions. Can you explain to me where hospitalization beds play into this? Because I know it's often left out.
Yeah, in a full system, I'd have about 15 or 20 of these cups everywhere. One thing is important to know is that the state hospital is very small, say, in that level. It's so limited, and they've known it's been so limited for so long that it's very difficult to get in there. Generally, you have to be involved in the criminal justice system, generally, to get in the state hospital. One of their issues at the state hospital was, where do I go after that? Where do I step down to? Because it's not even going to, like, some of our permanent supportive housing. You need something a little above that, even for some folks who have chronic long-term mental health conditions that aren't necessarily going to get resolved, but you need to learn with medication and other supports to sort of be semi-independent. So that's a huge issue, moving from, say, it's residential treatment is probably right above that in hospitalization. A lot of hospitals have those beds, but then they have to discharge into something else, say residential treatment or permanent supportive housing with outpatient treatment supports. So it'd be somewhere right in here, and then you dump into these other buckets.
To make sure I'm understanding correctly, would you walk me through a process where we currently invest in purchasing or the payment of supporting 200 excess hospitalization beds? That's the information I received from our budgetary lines last year.
200 beds where?
Hospitalization beds, my understanding is going to be at the U hospital.
So generally,
You can share this information. I mean, I've read it, and I'd like to understand what's happening. Is it an individual that is in need? Maybe they had a chronic exposure to the elements, or they deal with chronic addiction temporarily. Are they then released, or do they go directly into the medical centers? I just want to understand that flow a little bit better.
So what generally happens is, I'll put another one in here for, say detox or a hospital, right? So if this is, I'll say detox as an example, or it could be a hospital. They've got this much capacity, but they're always full. So what we do as a city is say, all right, if you're always full, we are going to buy down a couple of beds every day. I'm going to dump it into here for fun right now. So their full is like this because we have bought these beds to hold on to, so we always have access. So we go and get turned away from a police department perspective, say. So police go interview in a situation and they say, well, this person really needs detox and they're willing to go to detox, but there's no beds in detox. That's one way we've gone around that over the years of saying we always have a bed every day so we can guarantee the police to get somebody in, or say a hospital's a little different. They have to take somebody into the ER, but it doesn't mean they get seen quickly or they get held very long. And then at Huntsman Mental Health Institute, it's been a similar thing. We make sure we have some beds held there for us to make sure there's always capacity for us. That's generally why we'll buy down a bed in a medical facility to ensure that we don't get turned away real time when the police need it.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see, when I met with Intermountain and we were voting on the new downtown hospital, their data reflected that they intake a lot more people, specifically District 4 and District 3 had high utilization usage. And I'm just curious of that mental health gap in services into response. I'd love to see if we're able to forecast, because it's obvious to me 200 bed capacity for Salt Lake to compete in this hospitalization system is insufficient. So I'd love to know that gap. That wasn't really mentioned, but that was my feedback.
So the Huntsman Mental Health Institute Receiving Center moving to South Salt Lake will help some of that. Their first floor has like 34 beds, which isn't a lot, but those are meant to be less than 24 hours in usage. So you go in there, say police can go in there at any point and hopefully have a bed, and then they deal with it after that. If our move you upstairs to a longer term, say a week stay, move you out to another placement quickly. So hopefully the receiving center becomes that sort of focal point, and they are sort of the hub to move out to other treatment options. Whereas right now what happens is there are some beds up at the Huntsman Mental Health Institute of the U, but fewer, like 12. So say police are sort of looking at, where do I take this person today? If, say, the jail refuses them because of a medical condition or there's clearly something else going on, they're probably going to take them up to, say, LDS Hospital in the Avenues or Salt Lake Region, or whatever it is. And then the ED is where they get seen pretty quickly. And at that point, the police officer may have to stick around, or if they can't wait for hours, they'll have to leave. And the person is basically there until they walk out.
Yeah, I'd be curious what that gap could look like. I could see circumstances where it's a cold night, someone's suffering with hypothermia, they call 911 for help. They're saying, could this officer help me? And the only available space is a hospital bed for 24 hours to keep you warm. I'm trying to better understand, like, what are those flexible capacities so that people aren't suffering in elements, or if there's a chronic mental health crisis, or somebody sees someone that's harming themselves physically, or inflicting harm on another, where an officer could have the opportunity to intake to a professional space that could then assess cognitive ability. Obviously 34 beds is great for intake, but that's not enough. And we have that. We show, I already have looked internally from data that you've all provided us. So I'm just curious. I'd love to see that reflected in our budget this year. And I'd love to better understand what tools we could do to increase that hospitalization bed capacity.
I think the key piece would be, say, this is the hospital capacity you just talked about, is kind of right in the middle here. And the concern is there's not capacity to get somebody in there because it's full. Now, EDs, emergency departments, usually have to take somebody in if it's a medical issue, right? They have to be seen. It could take a long time. And sometimes people may not wait around that long. But if they're seen, the question is, where do they go from there? So if there's 34 beds at the receiving center coming up, that's not the problem. The problem is, can you move them out within a couple hours to another appropriate location, say another treatment provider or permanent supportive housing if you're there, or someplace else? If you can, you still got capacity of those 34 beds. Its flow through is the important piece here. And what we have across the system is a lack of flow because every spot is stopped. And so from a treatment provider perspective, a hospital ED would love it. Their discharge coordinators and their social workers, if they had the capacity to say, I can call it the shelter, and there's always beds available in the shelter, I could discharge the shelter 24 hours a day as much as I need to keep that bed open in the emergency department. Shelters are so important to this, they don't solve it. But from our public safety plan, the reason we double down on an interim shelter before the campus is fully developed is because this It's probably the quickest way to get to that right now. Everything else is probably going to take a little longer, a lot more money.
Andrew, are there, I'll say states or counties or states or metropolitan areas in this country that don't have this issue and have capacity and people can flow through to the space and the bed and the service that they need at that time in their recovery or their journey? Are there places that do that? And if so, do we know, is it more state funding? Is it faith communities? What is it that we don't have here that, why are all the cups full?
That's a great question. I think if you looked at, probably looked at any city in the U.S., most likely you're going to find something working well, at least one thing.
One thing working well?
Yeah, or two or three. What you don't generally find is an entire system working the way it needs to. So we went to Miami, Florida, for instance. You heard about the Miami model. Great model for diversion out of the jail into other systems. So what they've done is, instead of have 2 jails, they basically diverted enough people to take this jail. I'll move this over here. So they dumped all their folks out, and they got them into other treatment options, and they did a lot of treatment, right, say here, and they turned this jail literally into another treatment provider. That's what Miami's done. Now, that's great. Now, their shelters, they also have 6 things kind of like we have, privately funded, but it's still not enough. They still have a lot of folks experiencing homelessness because the U.S. in general is struggling in the housing end so badly. And so if you look anywhere in the country, it's hard to find a place that doesn't have a housing problem going on. And that backs the whole system up. That's really a problem for everybody. We don't say that housing solves everything, but housing can back everything else up in your community. So it's not a quick solution, but if we're serious about this in the long term, we make sure that we're always investing in the housing and different types of housing that are appropriate to allow all this to flow better.
Okay, thanks. One last comment, Councilman Petro.
So the original point was talking about how constituents call on us and want things moved and want things changed. For those who are paying attention or might be later, I'd like to outline what a realistic expectation. I've been reminding all of my community councils that they're not just constituents of a city, but also of a county and of a state and a country, and they can advocate on all levels, even though I'm the closest to them. Would an accurate expectation be that the distribution of the cups, the size of the cups, the location, geography of the cups, the funding for the cups is a strategy set forth by the state? The programmatic implementation of that strategy for health and human services is then given to the 29 counties, and that we are the public safety backstop so that when someone is a danger to themselves or others, we can reinforce the system? Or am I missing, is that oversimplified?
There's some truth in what you just said. It assumes probably a lot more foresight and coordination than we've had in the past, I'll say that. There's a lot of people working very hard for a lot of years on this. And so, say, Department of Health and Human Services, the state level has some oversight over some medical piece of this, but the counties have a lot of that. And the counties are expected planning. Cities, probably to your point, are dealing with what's on the ground here, right? The overflow stuff.
Well, and our safety is dealing with the health and human services crisis. It's not a tool meant for that task either.
I think there's a lot of things. Say the state prison comes to Salt Lake City to go, right? For a lot of reasons that are specific to the prison needs, okay? Does it make logical sense to place, say, a community resource option or a community correction center fairly close? Probably, in a lot of ways, right? It's rational. Does it help a city to have all that in one place? Probably not. So you can see 2 different sort of needs being addressed there or not addressed. Shelter is a similar thing. Over the years and years and years, Salt Lake City had a need for a large amount of shelter. And so it was expected that now, if you have a lot of shelter, you need a lot of services attached to that. So a lot of service providers now come in, and churches and everything else, and you get every sort of in one place, and it makes rational sense. But there wasn't necessarily on the city end saying, 30 years out, how would we like this to look? Or the county saying 30 years out, how would we like this to look? That was taken into account in the scattered site model 2018. We moved to different locations. And so that was a policy decision to move these separately in subpopulations for very good reasons, and in a way I think it benefited cities. we're sort of at a crossroads again about, does that continue to make sense? And the State Homeless Services Board has weighed in on their view of this. And then on top of that, there's also just a funding consideration. If we've got $27 million as a state that we've decided to invest in shelter, you can see how it makes sense to put it in one place to maximize the money. So yes, you're correct. And there's also just so many disparate needs and sort of impacts and influence over time that it doesn't necessarily look like a coherence, even though it makes sense once you know where it came from. So yes, as a city, we want to do everything we can to support a healthy system because it helps us out, and continue to advocate for a more balanced system across the board.
Andrew, thank you. We need to jump to our state legislative briefing because the legislative team needs to get to the same meeting that council members Peter and Wharton need to get to. But Andrew, thank you for that illustration. I have a lot in my head that I want to go through, and maybe we can do that offline or have this again. But we have Angela Price and Kate Bradshaw here from our state legislative team joining us virtually from the Capitol. Take it away.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you guys hear us okay? Great. It's great to be here with you, and thanks for moving us up on the agenda. We will take about 10 or 15 minutes. We'll try to keep our briefing fairly short, and if you guys have any specific questions as we're going through bills, feel free to interrupt us and ask us anything you'd like to know. So we are on week 4 of 7 of the legislative session, and things are just starting to get dropped up here in a pretty profound way. So lots going on for the city right now. I just want to caveat that just because we aren't addressing an issue today doesn't necessarily mean that we aren't working on it. We're working, I don't know, 30 or 40-ish bills right now. And if I'm not speaking about a specific issue today, it's simply because I maybe have briefed you on it last week and there aren't any current updates. So if there's something specific you'd like us to brief on that we aren't covering here, please let us know that, and we're happy to discuss those. So first I'm going to start with HB 465, Law Enforcement Agency Amendments by Representative Snyder. This is a bill that just came out yesterday. And what this bill does is it says Salt Lake City may enter into an interagency agreement with the Department of Public Services, or DPS, to address public safety issues within the city. If we don't enter into an agreement, our mitigation funding and our BNC road funds would be withheld. And there are 2 different shot clocks on that, both a July and an October date. And then it also creates a rapid response team to address illegal camping and large-scale illegal drug distribution within the city. We have been in ongoing and continue to be in conversations with the bill sponsor to work through some amendments on this bill that we are hoping to see the sponsor incorporate. And we are certainly grateful for his work on it to this date. This bill is in response to concerns that the legislature has around public safety in the city, and we look forward to continue to work with the sponsor on this legislation. Any questions that you guys would like on this? Or Kate, anything you'd like to add?
I don't know that I have anything to add. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Yeah, Councilmember Young.
So just a quick follow-up. I know that committees are working on wrapping up their appropriation recommendations. Have we seen anything related to resources to help address some of these public safety concerns?
Not that I'm aware of, Councilmember Young.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One thing that I think will be interesting with this collaboration with Department of Public Safety is what metrics we would use to track that. So I understand the bill right now doesn't have anything specific to metrics, but that's something that is just on my mind. I don't know that I necessarily have a question about that, other than to say, I think that'll be an important part of the conversation.
Yeah, agreed. We certainly have a list of metrics that we have identified in the public safety plan, and as we have been working through this bill, that we could could propose in if the city does choose to enter into an interagency agreement with the Department of Public Services.
Great.
Any other questions on this one, or else we'll move on?
I mean, I don't know how much of what Andrew just presented you saw, but I guess the companion question to that, and based on what Andrew just presented us, would be, are there any bills looking at the capacity of either the jail or shelters or things like that? And
There are, yes. So Representative Lisenby is running a bill on jail capacity, and I can see Kate trying to pull up the bill number for us right now.
HB 312.
HB 312 criminal justice amendments would address jail capacity. And then there are several bills that address unsheltered, both that Representative Clancy's running two of those. Senator Weiler has a bill that addresses Code Red that I believe just passed the Senate today on third reading. And then there are some, Representative Albrecht has a bill on mitigation funding that died in committee a couple of weeks ago that actually would have hindered the ability for the city to get more mitigation, not just us, but mitigation funding in general for shelter cities. And then there's also some civil commitment bills that Representative Albrecht has as well. Representative Miller has a homelessness bill of rights piece of legislation that he's working on as well. So that's kind of, there's a lot happening in the unsheltered space. I unfortunately caught the very end of Andrew's cup demonstration, but looking forward to rewatching that and hearing what he had to say there.
thanks. I
Thank
don't think there's
you.
any more questions on that topic.
Okay, thank you. The next item we want to bring up to you is HB 300 amendments to election law by Representative Burton. We have seen both the House has identified election, I guess I'm going to use the word reform in quotation marks, but that election reform is a big priority for the House this year. There's numerous election bills, really kind of heavily focused around mail-in voting. In Salt Lake City and cities across the state, we've seen a pretty substantial uptick when the state converted to mail-in voting, especially in municipal elections. So this is something that we are watching really closely with our partners at the Utah League of Cities and Towns. Mail-in voting has increased voter turnout in the city and has also had a pretty profound impact on our city costs as well. So what this bill would do would still allow for mail-in voting, but it would require that the ballots have to show an ID when they're turned in. There are drop boxes required, and poll workers will have to staff those drop boxes. And if you guys remember back to the election just in November, there were quite a few issues in counties across the state of not having enough poll workers, not having enough ballots, and not being able to manage the lines for in-person voting. And so we certainly are concerned about that. Voters can still vote in person with this legislation. And then there are certain provisions that would allow a voter to opt in to get the mail-in ballot. So you would have to request it. I believe each year you'd have to certify that you want a mail-in ballot. And there's also some special language around military and individuals that are serving missions out of the state. As I said, this would have a pretty profound impact on municipal elections. So the league is working this bill pretty heavily to see if we can get some amendments to it. Kate, anything you want to add on this one?
You know, the League of Cities and Towns in their legislative policy committee meeting yesterday, which I know some of you attended, did do some Slido surveying with some really interesting results. I think it's an issue that's broad concern for municipalities, since municipalities represent 50% of elections. There's probably some good ideas that will likely come on the Senate side about how to have election integrity without feeling like it's a restrictive ability to return ballots and limiting those ballots. So as we're looking at the issue, it doesn't appear that necessarily the House and the Senate are on the same page. So we expect this bill will see some improvements, and they'll likely come on the Senate side. It's about 15 bills down from consideration right now on the House side.
Mr. Chair. Thank you for that update.
sorry.
Just real quick one. I think Salt Lake County has like 28 Dropbox, and we'd have to go up to like 75 Dropbox. And then you just talk about the whole idea of the fraud side of the house, and then we're just exponentially increasing the amount of chances of additional problems with 3 times as many Dropboxes for a long length of time with poll workers and that side stuff. So the high fiscal note for the counties, and I'm not even sure if it's going to actually solve the problem that they're looking to solve, because it's going to induce other connection problems that we don't have at this point. So my 2 cents there, and I appreciate all the work on that bill and the league's work.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'm going to just quickly highlight 2 other bills for you, and then have Kate give a quick update on 2 energy bills. So the first is HB 198, Highway Expansion Impacts on Signage Amendments. This is Representative Peterson's bill. This is the billboard bill that I brought to you last week. Just giving you an update that there's a lot of work happening through the Utah League of Cities and Towns that the city, Salt Lake City, is also participating in, with many other cities that would be impacted by this bill on amendments. And so we're hoping that we have reached some agreements on this legislation to not have it be as expansive as it currently is, and allowing billboards to relocate anywhere along a highway widening project within the state. So more to come there. And then, sorry, did you have a question on that one?
It doesn't look like it.
Okay, sorry, I thought I heard someone chime in. And then the other one that I'll quickly touch on and then pass over to Kate is HB 355, Critical Infrastructure Material Amendments. This is Representative Snyder's bill. And I briefed you on this last week, just an update that this is the gravel pit bill that was introduced last year, went to a study, and is being modified. Currently, again, our partners at the Utah League of Cities and Towns, in addition to several other cities, are working with the bill sponsor on some amendments to this legislation, and we are hoping to get those amendments incorporated on that bill that would not expand the scope as far as it currently is, and allowing gravel pits that own property to expand as freely as this legislation would. So, Kate, anything you want to add on those 2?
The gravel pit bill, it has been assigned out to committee, but not yet scheduled for a hearing. Hopefully, with the discussions that are taking place with the sponsor, he won't move it through until some of those discussions are fruitful and have some changes that are reflected in the bill.
Any questions for us on those 2? Or else I'll turn it over to Kate to talk 2 energy bills for you.
Let's go to the energy bills.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so there's 2 energy bills that we've been keeping on the tracking list that I know sustainability has been interested in. SB 132 and SB 227. These are 2 very similar bills, but different ways to tackle the issue. They're aimed at large loads of 50 megawatts or greater. So this is data centers, other significant hyperscaler users, and allowing them a pathway to be able to do projects either through the investor-owned utility, Rocky Mountain Power, or kind of a pressure relief valve where they can do projects directly with a third party. Senator Sandel's version has had some modifications that are allowing renewables to play a role back into the bill, still in a more limited format. Senator Colomore's bill is seen as being the more renewable friendly, as it doesn't place the same limitations and would allow renewables to play a role in serving the large load users. Both of these are kind of shifts in policy and are a little bit challenging for Rocky Mountain Power to accept. It appears that if there was a path that was slightly easier for them, it would probably be Senator Sandals' bill rather than Senator Colomore's bill. However, both bills can't pass because they're dealing in the same area. They would end up being conflicting. They're both members of Senate leadership. So we expect at some point, probably fairly soon, there'll be kind of a merger of these two bills and into kind of one workable idea. So anyway, it's a bill I know has been of interest to some of you, and certainly something that the sustainability team has been asking us to keep abreast of.
That's all we have for you as far as updates. No, we're working a lot on the homelessness bills, on the housing and land use bills, on water, energy, there's police, there's a lot going on right now. And so happy to provide an update on any specific bills that you would like to hear about next week. And if there are no more questions, we'll let you guys get back to your agenda.
Council members, thanks for all the work you're doing up there. We really appreciate it. Looks like there's no more questions.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Okay, so we are back to item number 3, which is information. Again, number 2, we have moved to next week to give a chance to have that conversation when there's the full council here. So number 3 is upcoming Liberty Park Cultural Landscape Report and Vision Plan Update. Council Policy Analyst Allison Rowland is here to give an update, and then Tom Millar, Planning and Design Division Director, Public Lands Department.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Liberty Park planning process is currently getting underway, and as you may recall, there's several existing projects that are already being funded and being developed at Liberty Park. So these would be incorporated into the future plan. So the Department of Public Lands is here to provide an overview of their plans for the creation of a 10-year Liberty Park plan, similar to the plans that they have developed for other parks and recreation areas in the city. The products from this planning project will include a cultural landscape report, a vision plan, which will be based on extensive public and stakeholder engagement, and several technical documents. And these documents are all scheduled to be completed by fall of 2026. So I will turn it over to Tom to go through the pretty pictures and other elements of the plan in more detail.
Thanks, Allison. We have our consultants who are working with us on this project online, as well as our staff project manager, Catherine Sontag. And I'll just briefly cue them up and then turn the time over to them. As we all know, Liberty Park is one of the most significant parks in Salt Lake City. Not only is it the largest park that is owned and operated by Salt Lake City, but it is really a central park for everybody, not just Salt Lake City residents and visitors, but regionally throughout the county and through multiple counties. We, in October, on the Public Lands blog, posted a wonderful history of where we were and how we got to where we are right now with Liberty Park, the amenities that it currently has, and the many treasured stories that people have shared over the years at Liberty Park. This cultural landscape report and vision plan will help us set the stage for the next phase of Liberty Park. That does not mean that we intend to change its nature as a regional park, as a destination for everybody. But what the two sides of the plan will do is look at the past, what is important in the park, what has been important in the past that doesn't exist any longer, and set a community-supported vision again for the next generation of Liberty Park users. And before I turn it over to Catherine and Kelly and Tina, I just want to share my favorite Liberty Park fact, which is that Liberty Park and Disneyland are the same size.
Oh.
To the acre.
Wow.
There you go. Minus California Adventure, which doesn't really count. So just Disneyland itself within the railroad is 100 acres. So with that, I'll turn it over to Catherine,
You're
Tina,
saying
and
there's
Kelly.
room for like a space mountain. That's what I'm hearing.
Number of acres, it is the same
And
size.
it's gonna, all right,
Yep.
Space Mountain, here we come.
Sorry, I'll turn it over to Kelly, Tina, and Catherine now. Sorry.
Great, thanks, Tom. So good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to provide a briefing on this project. This is the first of several briefings that we'll provide throughout the process. Today, we'll focus on providing an overview of the project, including our team, the purpose of the two documents, and kind of an overview of the schedule. So the planning process, and then also our public outreach process. And if you can proceed to the next slide. So again, just a summary of what we'll be sharing today. And the next slide includes an overview of our team. So I'm Kelly Ream. I'm a senior planner and associate principal here at Mundus Bishop. I'm joined today by Tina Bishop, a historical landscape architect and principal at Mundus Bishop. And then on our team, we also have OV Consulting. They'll be leading the community outreach process to ensure an equitable and diverse representation. So the next slide. And so again, I want to reiterate Tom's excitement that, we're really excited to be working with Salt Lake City and the community to develop a CLR and vision plan for Liberty Park. We understand the significance of this park, the significance that it has to the community and has historically had. And we look forward to working with the community to ensure the long-term protection of the natural and cultural resources that contribute to the significance of Liberty Park. Also while ensuring that the park continues to evolve to meet current uses and needs. This project was identified in the Public Lands Master Plan developed in 2022. It includes the development of two standalone documents. The first document is the Cultural Landscape Report, or a CLR for short. And this will be the primary guidance document for the treatment and use of the cultural landscape. The CLR will include a summary and evaluation of Liberty Park from its early settlement by Isaac Chase to its establishment as Salt Lake City's first park to its present day use. The CLR will also document existing condition and identify the resources and qualities that contribute to the historic significance of the park and that make Liberty Park Liberty Park. These include the features such as those tree-lined walks and roads throughout the park, the open meadows and mountain views. The CLR will also include design guidance for the long-term protection of the resources and design guidance to inform future planning and design processes. This is important because the guidance will provide consistency and flexibility to ensure that the park continues to evolve to meet current needs while honoring its deep history and iconic spaces. The second document is the vision plan. The vision plan will be developed concurrently with the CLR to ensure that the documents inform and support one another. This plan will present a shared vision with input from the city stakeholders and the community. And it will focus on providing guidance for the next 10 years for the use, improvement, and management of the park. Next slide, please. So a key outcome of these plans will be a tree succession strategy to guide stewardship and replacement of historic trees. Through our early discussions with stakeholders and talking to people who were at the park, we quickly found that that the mature allées and trees are really what people love about the park and they value, and that identifying an implementation strategy to preserve these iconic allées is critical. So the next slide, please. So the planning process for these two documents is a little over 2 years. As I mentioned before, we will be developing them concurrently so they speak to one another. We're currently developing our historic documentation and assessment for the cultural landscape report, and we'll be submitting that this spring. With this submittal, we'll also kick off the visioning plan to ensure that the community's vision is captured both in our treatment recommendations in the cultural landscape report, and that the vision plan reflects the historic documentation and existing condition findings of the cultural landscape report. Based on community input and the completion of the CLR, we'll develop alternatives for the vision plan and select preferred vision plan for Liberty Park in the summer of 2026. Throughout this process, we'll engage community members, stakeholders, council, and the HLC at key milestones. Similarly, we'll also be in the park, and I will talk about those in a little bit more detail. Can you proceed to the next slide? So the Technical Advisory Committee is comprised of subject matter experts from within the city and also from partner agencies. We'll engage this group at key milestones to share findings and also discuss recommendations to ensure that both documents reflect the needs of these individuals and present guidance in a format that is easy for them to reference and also implement recommendations. The next group is the Community Advisory Committee, and they are highlighted on the next slide. The Community Advisory Committee includes key community members who will also provide valuable input at milestones and serve as ambassadors to the community and interest groups that they represent, being that touch point who keeps everybody involved and up to date on the process. And the final key group that we'll be engaging is on the next slide. And this is the larger public. So our process is really committed to a community-centered outreach process that puts listening and actively seeking input from the public at the center of this process. This includes providing updates and also options for in-person and virtual engagement, including pop-up events in the park to capture park users where they are, surveys and open houses, and also providing updates regularly through the project website, which has been launched, and other channels. On the next slide, of course, we have a map of the park. So thanks for the opportunity to present, and I will hand it back to Tom to field any questions. And I'm happy to jump in.
Council members, any questions on this?
Thank you. I appreciate the timeline and the thoughtfulness in which you're pre-planning the community engagement piece. I think one of the things that I regularly hear is we have residents who see the changes happening and think where was my voice in this? So thank you for really planning out a lengthy time period for folks to be able to get their message heard. I'm just wondering, as we continue to seek that input related to the plan before moving into actual steps, what are things that we can do to support you in getting that message out so that we have fewer residents on that side of, where was my opportunity?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. We have had great success in being able to receive a lot more input than we normally would by including this information in council members' newsletters, social media posts. I think anything to get the word out beyond just our kind of organic reach that we can do as public lands is really important. And because Liberty Park is so much more than just a park in the spiritual map of every Salt Laker, it would be really important for us to get help from every branch of government and every person who hears about it to share it with their friends and neighbors too.
I appreciate that. And I am sure happy, I'm not going to commit anyone else, but I'm sure happy to share that out. I will just say that to your point, like Liberty Park is one of those kind of iconic parks across Salt Lake City that it really doesn't matter what district you live in, you're invested in it. And so I think whatever we can do collectively as council to help amplify that message, please send it our way so that we can make sure we're doing our well.
Thank you.
Lopez Chavez?
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for the report. I wanted to share real quick. Tracy Avery has also gone through strategic planning. And if it isn't on your to-do list, I recommend reaching out to them. They came up with really good data points in relation to those closest geographic proximity to them, and also a focus on families and the vision in creating a safer park or safer Tracy Aviary. But also kind of really cool that they're thinking about food access. I know they have their cafe, but they were looking at how they can participate in the greater apparatus that is Liberty Park. Otherwise, I'm really excited to be a part of this process with you. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll do that.
Can we pull up the slide that had the timeline on it one more time?
Sure.
So it sounded like a lot of this was going to be happening in 2026. The public engagement part, am I understanding that right, Tom?
So there's
A few
as Kelly mentioned, 3 different kinds of engagement with the technical advisory committee, a community advisory committee, and then the broader public. And I'll have Kelly and Catherine describe kind of that broader public outreach and when that might be occurring so that people are aware of when it should be starting, and if it doesn't start by then, where they can get in touch with us.
Mr. Chair.
So we'll be kicking off with our first In the Park event this May. And that'll really be an event where we share some key findings from the cultural landscape report and kind of generate excitement for the 2 projects. That's also an opportunity for people to give us their contact information and remain involved throughout the process. So the intent is that, although there is a bit of a gap between the next time we see them, which will be late fall, early winter 2026, there'll be opportunities through online surveys and also kind of pointed questionnaires to provide feedback. And then we'll have more opportunities for more in-person events in spring and summer of 2026. And those will really focus on sharing alternatives and developing a preferred alternative. So very tangible concepts that I'm sure will garner quite a bit of input on. And I think that key to this process is that we'll be looking at both virtual and in-person events. And making sure that, between these events, there isn't a lull in communication, so that people know that, even if they don't see us in the park, the project is very much making progress.
So May of 2025, and
Correct.
So I'd love to help advertise for that event. So if you can get that information to me, and I can work with our team to make sure at least District 5 residents know about that. But I'm sure we'd like to share that with everybody. Okay.
Thank you.
Alejandro, Councilmember Puy, I think I'm told is in the meeting with us and has his hands up. Go ahead.
Yes, hi, thank you. It's very important to me that we use this public engagement to also educate the neighbors about and set the expectations right. I have found that our city seeks public engagement and then comes up with a plan, and then the plan is years out or even delayed, and it's not anybody's fault. The world, things happen, but that we need to educate it along the way, that it's going to take years, and take the opportunity to just share some of that information, how it works. So not only seek feedback, but also take that opportunity to educate about the process, how long these things take, that maybe link that there's these other projects at the same time happening, and they're in the queue. I think that is important for people to get perspective on what's happening. So I will strongly encourage that, since it's the question that I get asked the most when we're talking about investment on parks.
Thanks, Councilor Pui. Tom, do you have a response to that? Or...
Yeah, we get that comment a lot. We gave you our input in 2016, and now we're just seeing the project come online. The great thing about cultural landscape reports and vision plans is that no matter whether a project comes after it or not, there will be every decision that's made in the park, however small or big, will be informed by this cultural landscape report and this understanding of the context of the site and the past of the site. We make changes to parks every day, and often those are not necessarily guided by a total, complete understanding of what's happened in the past or what the community believes or feels or thinks about the park. So we see this as a tremendous opportunity to inform every action in Liberty Park, that it is based in, founded in, not only that community engagement, but that history as well. But I think it's an excellent idea and something that we should be doing in our engagement work when we are just doing planning efforts, to tell people what the next steps might be. I think a lot of times, myself included, I sort of fill in the gaps and assume a lot and say, oh, well, they're asking me my opinion, there must be something big that's coming. And I think that we can be very honest with people about what is coming and what isn't coming yet, or what we don't know about, and but then also get their ideas on what they would like to see happen sooner rather than later.
Well, and I guess that's leads to a question that I had, is that this is a report that would it eventually become like a master plan that the council adopts, and then that leads to potential projects in the future? Is that sort of the result of this whole 2-year process, is like an adopted plan?
It won't necessarily be like a capital plan where it says you need to spend exactly this much on the exact projects every year, but it will give us that vision for what we should be doing or what we could do over the next 10 years of house. We did very similar reports for Pioneer Park and for Allen Park, because it was so important for us to understand the history and the historical significance of those sites before we made any plans for changes or funding requests for those sites. And I think that this would be very similar.
And if I could just add, Mr. Chair, this is something that I think that the council office has been trying to clarify with the various departments that do plans like this, and with the help of the attorney's office, because we're trying to figure out what are the key points where all of you want departments to check in to make sure that they are seeing that your visions and their visions are similar for how the progress will be made. And then obviously there is the funding component, which needs to be, which is another opportunity for checking in with the council.
Yeah, we would love the backing and the force that comes with a council endorsement or adoption of a plan. What we don't want to intentionally create is a lot more work when a tiny little part of a plan needs to be changed because it was very specific to a funding year or a maintenance best practice or something like that. So that's what we're also trying to figure out, is what elements, instead of just considering it an all or nothing thing, what elements of these vision plans or master plans or CLRs should or shouldn't be adopted by the legislative branch.
Okay, I appreciate that. One thing that I'll advocate as we begin this work with Liberty Park is, I've been very supportive of funding for parks and trying to reinvest in our public spaces. I think in this case with Liberty Park, I think we should have, at least in the range of options, that actually not much needs to be done to Liberty Park other than potentially, maintenance and things like that. But I think I guess I would just advocate that at least one of the options that we're considering is that Liberty Park is great the way it is, and we just need to maintain it, not all it entirely. So I get, that's just a personal opinion, but I hope that that's on our radar, like we might not have to fix, it might not be something that's broken that needs to be fixed, it just needs to be maintained.
Yeah, that's what's so great about doing the CLR and the vision plan together too. And Catherine, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, go
Just
ahead.
wanted to chime in. I think the wonderful thing about the CLR is it does give us the parameters around sort of understanding the historical significance and understanding what portions of the park we really do need to maintain for that historical integrity, and then maybe the portions of the park that where there's a little more freedom for improvement or for new design. And so I think once we have that document, it's something that we all feel like really keeps that character in place and honors the unique placemaking aspects of the park, then we'll be able to use that to guide the vision of the park. And it's definitely not prescriptive, I would say, in the way that many master plans are, but it's sort of carrying that vision forward in terms of how do we, whether it's the historic aspects or structures, or it's the tree canopy, or it's just having better guidance for maintenance generally, how do we sort of maintain that character of the park while also allowing there to be the improvements that are necessary or needed based on the way our city is changing over the next 10 years. So I think it's very much a living document in that sense.
Councilmember Young?
Yeah, so I'll just build on Councilmember Mono. I saw this happen in the Allen Park kind of plan and discussion. And so just to kind of draw a link between the two, there were a lot of existing structures, obviously, within that property. And there was a pretty robust conversation about which of these should be maintained. I do think that the framing of that was really helpful and maybe different than some of our other conversations. And it was helpful to then identify, so like which of these are things that we want to Councilmember Mono's point, keep and maintain versus what does it look like as a blank slate. So if there are lessons learned from that, I just appreciate and support that framing, because I think it helps our residents think about it a little bit differently, so that you don't have the I would love a Space Mountain, that then ruins, like kind of some of those existing pieces. But what are those elements that we want to keep and maintain?
Yeah, and the great thing, again, about the CLR and the vision plan is that you acknowledge as the bottom line that this is not a blank slate. This is a living historic landscape that people have a lot of opinions about and that there's a lot of history behind, and shouldn't be interpreted as okay, tell us what buildings in Liberty Park we should demolish and what we should put in their place. That is not our starting point at all. So, yeah.
I appreciate that. Great. Looks like there's no more comments on that.
If I could just say one more thing. I know that there was a question that came up about existing projects and future projects. The existing projects at the park that are currently funded are the Liberty Park Greenhouse, doing design and then construction documents for either a renovation, restoration, or a replacement of that greenhouse. That would be moving at the same timeline and with the same project team as the cultural landscape report, so that they are informing each other and we're not making any decisions about the greenhouse before the CLR is done. The Rotary Play Park, or the large playground, is funded by the GEO bond and by Parks impact fees, and construction of that will begin this year. We are also doing design.
That won't wait for the CLR.
It won't wait, but every project, ongoing, active, or upcoming, will still be informed by the CLR, and we'll aim to incorporate those recommendations as far as possible. The Seven Canyons Fountain art piece is currently funded for about $800,000 and is being reimagined as a dry art piece with the original artist, as well as a civil engineer and landscape architect. And then we'll also be resurfacing the tennis courts at Liberty Hills Tennis Center. There is one Liberty Park project that is in the CIP applications that you will potentially see if they're in the mayor's recommended budget and if CDCIP board does recommend them, but one that the administration has submitted, which is to do a full dredging of the lake at Liberty Park and replace the aeration system. The sludge itself is not historic, though it has been there for a long time. But it's building up so much that the water is very shallow. There's a lot of algae and dangerous algae, and untold number of ducks have perished in the last couple of years from that algae.
Ducks.
And the aeration system breaks so often that we have to drain the lake. We have to, during the winter, it's there, you can smell it now if you go by. And we want to make sure that system does not get put into a lake that has a lot of sediment that's going to build up and gunk up in there. So that is one that you may see come May, June timeframe when we start talking about CIP.
When we see that come forward, it would just be helpful to know how much are we paying for the annual closure and dredging, like related to what the cost is just to like fix it.
Sure.
I think that having sometimes that compare and contrast between the ongoing maintenance costs versus like what does it take to fix it, just helpful information.
Yeah, and one thing, we do use the lake as our secondary water source when we're irrigating the park at night, so we don't have to use all culinary. And so the better that water is and the cleaner it is, the easier it is for us to irrigate the park and maintain that irrigation system as well.
Great. All right, thanks,
Thank
Tom.
you.
Thanks, team. We're moving on to item number 4, which is an informational update about proposed golf fee changes. Allison Rowland is going to stay here from the council staff, and then Matt Kammeyer, the golf division director, is here.
Okay, Mr. Chair, this is I guess a two-step sort of briefing. First, because the Golf Division has said it plans to increase certain fees charged for the 2025 season. And as just as a reminder, the Golf Fund is an enterprise fund similar to, say, the Airport Fund, and so it's important that golf remains financially self-sufficient to the extent possible. So I want to talk a little bit more about that and then turn it over to Matt to talk about the sort of background of these proposed fee changes. But I want to mention before that an issue that council staff would appreciate your opinions on. So I may take a little longer than usual for my introduction. As you'll see in Matt's slides, demand for Salt Lake City courses has increased very sharply since 2017-18. And small changes to user fees have helped the division raise revenue for its long list of deferred capital projects, which has been accruing since, I think, probably before Matt was born. So it is a very long list. And the golf division has found that by adjusting golf fees to reflect the growing demand, the division is able to make faster progress on all this deferred maintenance across all 6 of its courses. The changes that are proposed today would provide an estimated $553,000 in new revenue to the Golf Fund for the 2025 golf season. And the specifics of the proposed fee changes are something that Matt will also discuss, but you can also read along in pages 4 and 5 of the transmittal. It's complex, I will warn you. So this briefing is primarily informational, but it also provides a chance for you to consider whether you would like to see any changes in the process for reviewing and adopting golf fees in future years. To review, just since 2017, when the council made a change to the golf fee ordinance, the Golf Division analyzes trends from the most recent season and publicizes any proposed fee changes as early each year as possible. That way, any proposed fee changes can be charged immediately, and depending on spring weather, the golf season may start as early as February, maybe. Certainly by March, it's often certain golf courses are playable. So it's important for them to get those proposed fee changes in place, and then they have been adopted by the council as part of the broader budget considerations in June. So there is that 4-month gap where golf prefers to have, where the council has given golf the flexibility to set golf fees in February, more or less, and then have those fees approved by the council in June when the council approves the full budget. And of course, you have a briefing that provides some detail on this in May, typically, when a staff member reviews the golf fund budget.
And the golf, we're talking greens fees, right? Like these are part of the CFS that we approve with the annual budget?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So these are part of the CFS. It is just approved altogether in 2017. I'm sorry, in 2017. In June is what I meant.
But we're considering additional flexibility for that to change prior to the annual budget because that will align with the golf season where our annual budget does not.
This is actually how golf has operated since 2017. 2018, sorry, that's right, it was changed in 2017, so since the 2018 season. And the idea, I think the background of this, and Matt could certainly speak more to this, is that it works better, well, there are two reasons. One, it works better for the golf courses to be able to have the fees set for the season rather than working on the fiscal year schedule as they would otherwise. And the other reason is, that it allows the golf division to be able to analyze the actual patterns of behavior at each course from the previous year before they make changes to those fees. So it can happen much more quicker than if they went through the fiscal year schedule, which would make them have to work 12 to 18 months before actually the fees would be changed. So I'm hoping that makes sense.
It does.
Okay. And then so the overall question that council staff has for you is whether you have any objections or concerns to the process as it's currently set up. And I don't know if you're ready to respond to that now or if you'd rather see Matt's presentation first.
Matt, why don't you go through your slides and then we can discuss that. I imagine we won't, but let's hear your pitch first.
I don't want to get too deep into the weeds before you have a chance to ask some questions. So as Allison has stated, I'll try to give somewhat of a background and how we got to where we were in 2017 when the decision was made to change how the golf fees were approved. I don't think anybody who's presently here other than myself that existed at that difficult time when golf finances were an annual discussion and an annual problem, and decisions were being made as to whether or not we should close golf courses because they weren't generating enough excess revenue to be able to reinvest back into the properties themselves. And the opinion of the council at the time was that they did not want to use general fund fees to really pay for these improvements. So at the time, in 2016, 2017, there was a lot of discussions on, how do we increase play? And the primary mechanism was let's lower the fees to try to encourage people to play more. But I would say from 2012 to the 2016, 2017, that wasn't successful. In fact, we're just lowering the price to people who were continuing to visit our courses. So that wasn't our path out at that point. So the decision was made internally to be able we have to find a path to start to increase these fees so we can generate some excess revenue to reinvest. And as Allison had explained and previously, in being able the golf season is aligned with the calendar year, and the fiscal year within the city budget is on a fiscal year. So there's about a 4 to 6 month gap between the time that decision to be made before it's implemented. And in the golf industry, it's very difficult to raise the fees in the middle of the season. So if we were to make a decision on increasing a fee and then not implement it till the following year, that's sometimes 12 to 16 months of time has elapsed, and that's not very responsive to other elements that may have appeared within the market during that time. So in 2017, the decision was made. Not only was it an agreement between the council, the city administration, within the Department of Public Services and in the golf division, was that golf needed more flexibility in being able to set their fees so we could be more responsive in being able to read those cues that we're seeing within the market. And the hope was to adjust upward so we could generate some excess revenue to manage these, a myriad of projects. I think our current estimate's about $35 million of deferred maintenance projects that we have at the golf courses. A lot of it is, fundamental infrastructure like irrigation systems, on-course restrooms, which we don't have a lot of, clubhouses, which are very old at this point. And our facilities department has said, look, it's better that you knock these down and start over rather than to continue to try to maintain them and improve them from that perspective. So in 2018, that was the first year that we implemented this process, which included the fee ordinance was changed. Previously, the golf fee ordinance allowed for the golf director, with the permission of the Public Services Department director and a representative from the mayor's office, to implement a discount within our fee structure if it was deemed necessary in order to increase play. That's how it was read at the time. But in 2017, that was updated to say that the same levels of approval, so it would be the Public Services Department director at the time and a mayor's office representative or a designee could approve an adjustment of the fees. So it wasn't just a discount, it was an adjustment. So we could actually increase the fees with the result to increase revenue on the courses that we would need to pay, give us the ability to pay for some of these projects. So in 2018, that was the first time that we did that. The idea wasn't to change fees throughout the year. It was just to give us some flexibility in the timing. So for instance, we made a decision in late 2017 to increase some fees and to remove some other fees and implement those at the start of 2018. So we utilized that process of approval, which also included us, it dictated that we would immediately have to update our golf course websites and our fee boards within the shop before we implemented those fees. And then to supply the updated CFS fee amounts through our budget process, and at the time it was through the Public Services Department, and then that would be approved through the process, the normal budget process, so it wasn't taking place outside of that. And that's primarily how we've operated since 2018, with each year, usually in October or November, really taking a look at the activity that we had at each course over the previous year. We look at other factors like what are our expenses, what are these items that we project may go up, and what's the overall health of the economy. Golf is a discretionary activity, so it's it's not a necessity. So if it's priced too high or it's inaccessible, people will either go to a competing golf course, or they may choose another recreation activity altogether. So these are all important factors that we look at. But as far as setting and implementing our fees, we've only done it once a year since 2018. So 2019 was done December of that year, and each following year so we received approval and updated the CFS, and it was later adopted through the budget process. So that kind of leads me up to, I think if we'll go to our next slide. This is a summary of how we track our rounds and revenue in a couple of different ways. This is maybe a little bit different, even though I've included these numbers, at least these metrics in our budget reports. These are the unit that we're tracking here is called a start. Other ways that we track it are through what's called a 9-hole equivalent. So usually when somebody plays a round of golf, it's 9 holes at a time, or they may play 18 holes. These metrics just include a start. So whoever shows up at the golf course and pays, whether they play 9 holes, 18 holes, or more, we count that just as one start. So as you can see, through 2018 through 2024, we've had a significant growth in our play at our courses, with two of I'd say the significant bumps taking place just prior to 2020 and through 2020, which that's kind of through the pandemic, which we recognize that affected a lot of people's ability to recreate, and golf was something that we continued to have available to people at that time. So we feel a lot of people that were looking to get outdoors and recreate, this was a This was an easy option for them. It brought a lot of people who had previously played golf, who had stopped, to come back into the game. And then again, you can see in 2023 and 2024, we had another big surge. So we can't necessarily attribute that surge to the previous one. So these are obviously numbers that we look at to determine, okay, what's the overall demand where we had. So you can see this has been a great kind of a shot in the arm of the entire golf industry. This isn't something that's unique to Salt Lake City. It's across the board. And so our goal and strategy throughout this time period is, okay, how do we kind of ride that wave and continue to funnel whatever excess revenue we have back into these projects and to get them started without us having to come back to the general fund and ask for assistance. Average utilization is the third line down, which I think is an important thing to look at. You can see the rate that where we got at 2018, that was an average of 58% of our courses were being utilized, or at least across the board, whereas now it's 109%. So that's actually more than 100% if you look at it that way. But how the metric is calculated, you would understand how that gets above 100%. But needless to say, we're operating at a pretty full level at the moment, which is fantastic. And the line below that, you can see our revenue numbers back from 2018 up to now to 2024, where we were just above 12 million at that point. So these are all significant and positive things from the golf fund standpoint in being able to, we want to still be able to have value because these are public golf courses, but at the same time, as an enterprise fund, and I think everybody within the administration and also the city council would agree that those improvements should be funded through the user fees. And so this is the mechanism by which we use as our strategy to try to, again, ride that fine line of how do we price it to keep people coming back on a regular basis, and we don't want to push them away to other activities as well. So I feel where we're at right now, we've accomplished that goal over the past several years, and we're appreciative of the ability that we have to kind of set our fees with this schedule, and would like to continue to be able to do that.
Okay. Is that all your slides?
That's all I've got right now. If you have other questions, there may be some other slides.
What is the proposed? So I'm looking at this revenue per start, but that is not the actual green fee. That's dependent on if each start was an 18-hole or a 9-hole round, and if they rented a cart. Is that all kind of factored into this revenue?
Right, and all that number is you're taking your total revenue and you're dividing it by your total starts. So that just said, okay, per start, what's the revenue that you're getting? Yeah. So fee the price doesn't play into that too much, but it's something that we want to be able to try to drive that number up as much as we can.
Okay, and then what is the proposed change for this upcoming season in terms of?
Well,
Maybe you want to show the slide with the
slide number
prices on it?
Yes.
Price changes.
Which is going to be difficult for everybody to read probably, but at slide 5, there's 2 slides, 5 and 6, that encompass the fee changes.
So these are sorry to interrupt, Matt, these are the changes that are proposed, that are also listed in the transmittal. So if they're hard to see here, you might get a better idea of it from the transmittal. You might get a better view. But there are a lot, and it's very detailed. So that's why I didn't try to repeat it in the staff report, and I knew Matt could do it here.
Right. So for ease of looking at this, all of the blue columns represent an increase. The column next to that's where the fee was the previous year. So this would be generally a $1 increase per 9 holes that we have. If you remember from the previous slide that we looked at, our utilization rate is quite high. Our revenue is quite high as well. My personal opinion is that even though there are many indicators within the economy that would suggest pull back a little bit when I look at the metrics that we're looking at as far as our utilization go, what's happening in the golf industry, and the strength and willingness of people to play golf, but not only play golf, but pay a higher rate and not have that dissuade how often they continue to come back. I feel that there's still room for us to be able to charge more. And when I say more, that doesn't mean that everybody pays more equally, if that makes sense. We have different fees for different age groups. That's the one element that we have within our golf program, is that there are different prices based upon which age you are. So we have junior rates, we have young adult rates, we have adult rates and senior rates. So that's kind of the one factor that we hope enables people to be able to utilize our courses as much as they can and not have price or other factors, life factors, be involved.
But it's $1 to $2 per round.
Exactly.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Dugan and then Young.
So I appreciate the explanation here, and I appreciate your leadership in the golf enterprise. So I really do appreciate all the work you've been doing and the outreach too. I like that the carts aren't changing much, which is also good. Keeping those low because you also don't want to push people away. So I like that.
We had previously raised those in last year and the year before to align with the purchase of new carts that we had available.
Great. On one question is just on the senior side. I've seen in other, like the ski industry and other industries, where they actually start bumping up the senior age. Yours is at 60. Others start at 65. At some ski resorts, they have a 70, then they have an 80. Is 60 kind of the standard for the industry as a senior rate? And are you seeing more over 60 play as we age? Are the over 60 group also being more and more of the players vice under 60? Or is that you don't really check that much?
65 is the standard for the industry. We're at 60, and we went from 65 to 60, I think, in 2012.
Okay.
As one of the attempts to try to increase play. And hope to increase revenue as well. We don't have a plan to increase that at 60. I think we're comfortable with that.
Just stay at 60? Okay.
We have noticed some public courses within our market have removed a senior discount. That's an interesting move, but it's not something that we plan on duplicating.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Young.
I appreciate sharing kind of the context and the analysis, especially in terms of the usage and how that, helps to inform where we are and where we need to be. I think for me, it's not a question of the change. They are very reasonable, and I appreciate that kind of measured approach. I think for me, it comes down to like how we message this to the individuals who are using the golf courses, because I think sometimes you can see it as it's $1 more, it's $2 more, and that can feel like a lot. I think when you frame it in terms of, this allows us to be able to maintain these facilities so that they are playable as part of kind of the public service that we offer, that can help change the narrative. And I would just love to know if there's a plan to kind of message that as opposed to just posting new fees and hoping everyone's okay with it.
That's a very good question, because we're not interested in chasing people away. We want to deliver value and a very good experience, a memorable experience, and so that's an important thing for us. We want to maintain our core customers as well. I think one element that I feel is important for our customer base to be not necessarily educated on, but to be aware of, is that we've, over the years, and it started in 2012, and again a few years ago, we've implemented a CIP fund, a fee for the golf fund. So it was originally $1 per 9 hole that we would set aside for this fund, which in previous years was never really able to be spent on projects because it was used as somewhat of a budget offset. We needed to show that we had that cash on hand. So that's how the money was utilized during those very difficult times. It's only been over the past 3 to 4 years, maybe in 5 years, we've started to utilize that fund, as well as we increased that $1 to $2 a few years ago to try to make a dent in these projects. So we have the funding that comes from that. In addition, I will also say that the city administration had earmarked 5 of the last 6 years, $500,000 to go towards a Rose Park irrigation system there. This would be the final year that we'll ask for that, and we should have everything in place. to finalize that. But over the past few years, we've been able to set aside additional funds beyond that and earmark it for these projects. So when we launch a project, I would like to be able to say, here's your money in action, and these are where your fees are going, and here's where the improvements are. So this last year, the last few months of last year, we were able to put in a significant portion of new and repaired cart paths at 4 of our courses. I think Bonneville will start that this spring, and Rose Park will come online in 2 more years. T-box leveling projects. We're putting in a new roof on the clubhouse at Mountain Dell. We replaced the deck there. Those are the type of projects that we're looking at. We have a large sinkhole in the parking lot at the Nibley Park Golf Course, if anyone's wondered what that is. That has been there since April. We were able to fund the repair of that, which will take place in the next few weeks. But those are the type of projects that we have. It's literal infrastructure stuff. Some of these courses, we have a large sinkhole. We have a similar large sinkhole at the Mountain Dell Golf Course. So we're able to take care of some of those projects through our surplus of fees, rather than having to come back to the general fund and say, we need you to pay for this. So I think the golfing public needs to know that and needs to be aware of it. But within the next year or so, there will be several new projects that we'll be able to add to that list that I think our golfers will be able to feel good about where their fees are going, where they're going.
That's great. I will say, just as a recent experience, kind of lesson learned looking forward, those tangible, like, here are things that we've been able to do, with the fees that you already pay, just so that folks can see that connection. We recently, I'm sure all of our Salt Lake residents know, changed trash recycle pickup days. Change is hard for everyone, my house included. My husband and son, you would have thought, we were no longer getting trash pickup, and the fact that our day changed. As a part of that, when I was like, let me show you the city website that says, that this helps with efficiency, that messaging was pretty high level. And for a lot of people, they were like, I don't get it, and so the more, including my household, God bless. As a part of that, I think being able to see, though, that it's like, this is what that means for you in terms of, when you pay these fees, we have level tee boxes, we have better golf cart paths, we have, what those things are. I think it just helps make it feel a little more accessible and manageable to then be like, all right, yeah, I'd pay $1 more for that. So whatever we can do to message that, my household appreciates it. I'm sure others will as well.
Thank you.
Council members, any additional questions? To Allison's policy question, are there any objections to continuing the way that it has been going with these fees being adjusted outside of the budget year? I see none, so I think continue doing that. And we don't need to, there's no vote on that, right? Okay. All right. Thank you. We have moved. Okay, so that was item number 4. We're now on item number 5, which is the 2025 through 2029 Housing and Urban Development Consolidated Plan Follow-Up. Tony Milner from Housing Stability, Heather Royale, Dennis Rutledge, and I see you have a few other people with you. So please introduce yourself if you come up to speak.
Great. We are down Ben Ludke, so I'm going to pretend to be Ben, if that's okay, and kind of do the introduction. We're down council staff member to introduce.
Oh,
okay.
yes.
So just pretend I'm Ben for a few minutes.
Please do your own introduction.
Thank you, council. This is now the second time kind of follow-up to kind of bring to you the city's HUD consolidated plan, which is required. It's a required 5-year plan every year. It helps to be a good roadmap for directing federal funding, the HUD funding for the next 5 years. So we were last with you on October 1st, and at that time we received a lot of your feedback, which was greatly appreciated. Thank you for kind of putting eyes and helping give your input early on in the process, so then that way when we're coming to you with this draft, that way we've been able to incorporate that ahead of time. So we apologize. You'll see in your council report that about 300 plus pages of your council report is is a draft of the consolidated plan. So sorry for taking up all that space, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. Wanted to do a great appreciation for the process that has gone on. This is basically pulling together or the end of about a 1.5 year long process that we have to undertake. It's a very intensive process for community engagement, research, etc. In the audience, we actually have Aaron Sanborn with Zion's Public Finance Inc., who was the consultant with the project. We greatly appreciate him and his team. As well as for the community engagement aspect of it, we had NeighborWorks Salt Lake, which helped out and did a lot of good work for us during that time. Also, basically huge shout out to the HUD team here at the cities, especially Dennis Rutledge, who's here at the table, who you'll be hearing from in just a little bit more, but as well as the other team members, Carrie Thomas, Sarah Nelson, and also Jack Markman as well, and Tyler Durfee, who's also behind us. So this is a lot of work to get to this point, and greatly appreciate all that has been done leading up to this. Before we kind of go into the draft goals and strategies, I do just want to circle back and just talk about the lengthy public process that this took place. We had 40 plus internal stakeholders from the city. Again, city council staff was part of that process to help give input and direction, and also the need for the community in the next 5 years. We held 2 separate meetings with those. We also held 2 separate meetings with about 45 external stakeholders as well. We did online community surveying. We got hundreds of responses from the surveys about the next 5 years, as well as we did about 13 community events and held a public hearing and a public comment period, and then lots of social media information as well. So, with all that said, we will talk about next steps after this at the very end of the small presentation that we have. But again, thank you again for your attention and time early on in the consolidated plan process. With that, we'll turn it over to Heather.
Sure. Thanks, Tony. So of the 310-page plan, what we'll go through in the slides is really just, the federal government does not always appreciate brevity in the same way that we do. This will be a very high-level overview, much of which you've already seen, but we will focus also on the changes that we have made based on the council feedback as a result of the first briefing that we did, so that you are aware that we have incorporated that into the larger consolidated plan, which you, of course, at your leisure can read. I will call out specifically that a slightly more in-depth but still brief overview of the consolidated plan is included in the executive summary, which are pages 6 through 12 of that plan document. So if you're looking for something a little bit more robust than what we present today, but maybe less than 310 pages, that will give you a really good overview. And then the map is on page 242 of the plan, and in that map, Council in the last feedback said that they were supportive of the map, but would like to review that and reassess those boundaries every 2 years, which we are, of course, supportive of, and have included that in the consolidated plan as well, just so you are aware. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So based on community feedback and council feedback, we have 6 core goals and then underlying strategies for those goals. 5 of those goals are ones that you've seen before. Those are the housing priorities, homeless services, transportation, community services, business and workforce development, and then we added the goal of environmental remediation at the request of council so that we can make those funds available for certain types of activities to address that. Next slide, please.
And we'll just do some brief overview of the goals and the strategies for the goals. So the first one would be housing. And under that, we are hoping to protect tenants, increase housing stability, preserve existing affordable housing, and produce more affordable housing. And to do that, we are hoping to enhance tenant resources and services to prevent displacement, expand HUD's tenant-based rental assistance programs to help seniors age in place, invest in home rehabilitation, emergency repair, and seismic retrofit programs, which would include the Fix the Bricks program that we already are doing in our department. Acquire and rehabilitate naturally occurring affordable housing, establish and support community land trusts, provide incentives for developers for the development of mixed income, family-oriented, and accessible housing with a focus of not concentrating deeply affordable housing in the West Side neighborhoods. We, per council feedback, are specifically calling out the prioritization of mixed income housing development as well, number 7, and then also to promote affordable home ownership and wealth building opportunities for low income families. The next one. Can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, we did, okay. Homeless services. So under homeless services, we are looking to expand and enhance services and resources that prevent homelessness, increase access to and availability of supportive services and case management for people experiencing and at risk of homelessness, and prioritize resources and services for individuals experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And the strategies for those, we hope to complete our increase rent assistance programs to stabilize housing, develop a relocation assistance fund for tenants facing displacement, implement and enforce a displaced tenant preference policy, fund legal aid programs for eviction prevention and criminal record expungement, invest in wraparound services beyond shelters, including medical and dental care, create a centralized database to facilitate collaboration among services providers and expedite housing placements, expand mobile homeless services such as health services and outreach programs, and support the development of non-congregate housing options, managed camping areas, and accessible storage facilities.
Next slide, please. So under the transportation goal, the goal is to make transit and active transportation competitive and attractive modes of travel, support investment that will move toward a goal of zero traffic deaths, and heal the east-west transportation divide. The underlying strategies for that would be expand transit accessibility through programs similar to the Hive Pass, fund sidewalk improvement programs, and expand ADA-compliant curb cuts across neighborhoods. One of the questions we received after the last briefing was whether or not that would include other public right-of-ways, such as sidewalks, curbs, gutter ramps, and the answer to that is yes, it would include all of those for the purpose of ADA accessibility. Implement safety measures around schools, parks, and employment centers to enhance pedestrian and cyclist safety, improve roadway safety and transit connectivity by increasing bus stop shelters, route frequency, and destination options. Next slide, please. And then community services, the goal is to improve access and opportunity to relevant and dignified food choices, increase access to high quality and affordable childcare and out of school care, and improve access to technology literacy. So those strategies would be support programs that offer affordable and relevant food choices. And then on number 2, we actually, per council feedback, combined 2 previous strategies into one for a more robust child care resource strategy, which would include providing resources to help parents access affordable and reliable child care, including child care programs focused on early childhood development, and then increasing affordability and service capacity for children of all ages and stages of development. So just to kind of be really comprehensive in the approach to that. Provide resources to help parents access affordable and reliable childcare, develop and expand technology centers to enhance digital literacy, and implement broadband initiatives to increase free Wi-Fi availability in public spaces. And we will coordinate with state and federal relevant agencies to avoid duplication of services as we're working through those strategies, particularly where broadband is involved.
Next slide, please. Goal 5 would be business and workforce development, which would be job training and support services, small business support, and small local business facade improvements. The strategies for those would include prioritizing job training programs, especially in trades with apprenticeship and internships, offer wraparound services such as childcare, English language learner education, and career counseling to support job seekers, Focus on training programs for youth and individuals experiencing homelessness with incentives for business to hire trained individuals. Expand small business support through grant programs, low-interest gap loans, and simplified application processes, particularly targeting underserved communities. Subsidize lease programs for neighborhood level small business nonprofits, and broaden the scope of the facade improvement program to assist more businesses in beautification efforts and ADA compliance. And then the next one. And the last one is the goal that was called out last time that the council wanted to add, which was the environmental remediation, which would include conducting environmental contamination testing and remediation. Strategies would include improved remediation efforts on the west side properties that were once manufacturing, industrial use, or dumping sites, and allow funding to fill gaps left by other funding sources.
Next slide, please. So our next steps for this are a public comment period on the draft consolidated plan, all 300 pages of that. We will be posting that for public viewing and comment starting March 13th. We're required to do a 30-day public comment period, but we're actually going to extend it out a little bit longer to provide adequate opportunities. So we will go through March 25th. And then the mayor will be presenting her funding recommendations at the public hearing on March 4th, or just ahead of the public hearing on March 4th in the formal meeting. We will have our first funding briefing for the annual allocations that you guys go through every year with the HUD funding on March 18th. So that transmittal will be coming shortly next week. And then we'll start that process. That's technically year one of the consolidated plan. The second briefing for that will be March 25th with a third, if needed, on the 1st or the 8th. And then council final adoption of both the consolidated plan and the annual allocations for the first year of the plan are scheduled to be April 15th, with our HUD submission deadline currently slated to be May 15th. There is some, that's still a little bit up in the air depending on what happens at the federal level, but currently we're anticipating May 15th, which is our typical federal deadline.
Okay, thank you. That's all of our presentation. Do you have any questions or anything we can help?
Councilmember Dugan and then Young.
Yeah, thank you very much. And your last comment was really kind of my question, because if you go to that last slide and you talked about March 4th is when the mayor's going to present, the recommendation, and the budget reconciliation and the appropriations happens like 2 weeks after that. So is this just based on what we received last fiscal year and just assuming that it's flatlined for this next fiscal year, or that's just your estimates at that point?
Sure, I'm happy to take that. It is based on a couple of different things. It's based in part on what we know to be recaptured funds for reallocation, what we anticipate for program income based on our calculations and working with finance. And then, yes, it is also an estimation of what we anticipate receiving from the federal government based on largely on what we received this current year, but also taking into account some things that we know were kind of being discussed behind the scenes even prior to the current administration. For example, the HOPWA formula has been changing for the last several years, so that's taken into account a little bit. But it is, with the exception of the reallocation fund, the recaptured funding, the rest of it is estimated.
Okay. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thanks. Appreciate that.
Same offer as we've made earlier in the meeting. If there are things that we can do to be able to promote the public comment period through council channels, we would love that opportunity just to be able to make sure we're utilizing our communication channels to get out.
Perfect.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, we would appreciate that.
Can we pull up the slide about homeless services?
Sure.
I think that's Scott. I'm open to this not being one of our priorities, but I know that some restrictions on how those funds could be used, and I'm wondering if we would want to add something like ancillary services that help people get into shelter, for instance, pet care or things like that, that we don't necessarily think about as a first line issue, but actually do prevent people from getting into shelter. Do you think that this is more flexible than our previous 5-year plan in order to accommodate those types of services, or would we need to make some changes for that?
Dennis?
Sure, I'll take that. I do think that it's more flexible than our previous or current consolidated plan, which ends in June of this year. However, the pet care is actually prohibited under the CDBG regulations. It is something that even if we wanted to include in our consolidated plan would not be an eligible activity. We did reach out to our HUD office last year because we had an application and we really wanted to make sure that before we disqualified anybody, we explored all the avenues in terms of how we could qualify such an activity, and we were able to provide some technical assistance to that agency who did reapply this year, and so you will see that coming before you. Dennis can probably speak to whether or not they have currently been recommended funding without getting ahead of ourselves for the annual allocation briefing, but
Yeah, they did apply through the ESG program this year. We did work with them to fix their application a little bit to make sure that they qualify for the funding. They were recommended for funding through the board, so you'll see that come through once you guys receive the recommendations from the board.
Okay, great.
so in short, we just provided technical assistance to have them incorporate some additional services into what they were doing, directly benefiting the persons with the pets, which then made them eligible under the federal regulations.
Okay, great. Appreciate your help with that. I bring it up for that specific case, but also more just broadly that we don't know what types of organizations are going to be needing funding that are providing services that we might not be able to think of. So I just more generally appreciate as much flexibility as we can get in order to be able to help those organizations that we might not know of yet. But I know that the point of the plan is that we have to be reasonably specific. So there's that fine line, but appreciate that. Any other council questions? Any other comments from your team?
No, again, just a huge thank you again for putting us on the calendar earlier in the year, again, getting it in front of you. That greatly helped the process. And we look forward to coming back to you on March 4th with the annual allocations, the recommendations, which we get to then. That's always a fun process to pass out limited funding to many deserving causes. So
thank you.
We're ready if you are.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
All right, we have already done item number 6. We do not have a chair or a vice chair in our meeting, so I assume there's no report from them.
I have no comment.
Yeah, okay. Executive Director announcements. All right, we have no closed session, so we are done before 5 o'clock today, people. We're adjourned.